I need to get something off my chest. I'm homesick. I've lived in England for a good 4 years now, and yes, it has its perks. It's not as cold, it doesn't rain as much, but I miss my deep fried pizzas and good old Scottish banter. So, the way I've been dealing with this internal suffering, and in order to feel connected to my people again, I've been playing and listening to an obscene amount of Scottish folk music. And I'll be honest, this is something I, as a violinist who has only ever been interested in playing classical music, never thought I would be saying. I've even been referring to my violin as a fiddle, so that's where I'm at. Anyway, this brings me to the topic of today's episode, because whilst I was swimming around in the depths of Scottish folk music, researching and listening to some of the most famous tunes and learning about William Marshall and James Scott Skinner, I started to wonder, where are the women? Now, just to clarify, there are some incredible women working in Scottish trad today. People like singer Iona Fife, fiddle player Jenna Reid, and of course, Julie Fowlis. But when I was going through all of these staple pieces within the Scottish traditional canon, there seemed to be a real lack of women, and I was curious as to why that was. So today we're going to do some course correcting, and I'm going to talk to you about the lives of some of the most important women in the golden age of Scottish fiddle music. And for those of you that don't know, like me, the golden age refers to the 18th and 19th century of Scottish music. So grab your buttery and a cup of tea, let's get into it. Welcome to Chords and Queens. So let's start by setting the scene and travelling back to Scotland in the late 18th century, where the place transformed from a traditional rural society into an intellectual and industrial hub. After the 1746 Battle of Culloden, Scottish intellectual enlightenment became a thing led by key figures like Adam Smith. The Highland clearances forced people from their homes to make way for sheep farming, which saw a great migration to the lowlands, as well as people just leaving Scotland altogether to go to places like North America and Australia. Industrialization became pretty popular, with textiles, coal, and iron businesses really taking off. And we started to see urbanization of cities like Edinburgh, for example. And this is the time of the Scottish Messiah, also known as Robert Burns, who wrote his famous poems during this time. And this work, along with the writings of Sir Walter Scott, started to shape the cultural narrative of this wee country called Scotland. And women, well, you're probably not surprised to learn that we were repressed. Unmarried women could be found working, though as farm servants, but legally women had barely any rights, and access to education was limited, and also just access to public life in general was largely shut off. And I believe if you did pursue any creative work, that publishing under your own name was a no-no, but you could maybe publish anonymously under the alias of a young lady, or just a lady. What a choice. And this might have been a more socially acceptable compromise. So what did this mean for women composers and musicians? Well, according to this wonderful article written by Aaron McGregor, women were very much involved in the creation of traditional music, from accounts of women taking fiddle lessons to finding music manuscripts written for or by women. There appears to be clear evidence that the narrative that women didn't really engage with trad music is fundamentally wrong. So why might that be, I hear you ask? Well, your guess is as good as mine, but my opinion on the matter is that women generally, not just in music, just were always seen as inferior. If they wrote a piece of music, it was seen as cute, or perhaps a nice gesture that would intrigue the likes of a male suitor. But women shouldn't be composers. And we see that with so many of the greats like Clara Schumann, Fanny Mendelssohn. At least that's what I've deciphered from my many years investigating the lives of great but forgotten composers. McGregor writes that they discovered dozens of examples of volumes containing tunes by female composers, and including collections entirely written by one or more women. So now that we've debunked the idea that women weren't involved in creating great Scottish trad music, let's find out more about these remarkable trailblazers, starting with Euphemia Murray of Auchtertyre. And her story will be of interest to all my CSI and Law of Order fans, basically anyone who likes a good mystery, because honestly, I've been researching her for a while and I'm still trying to untangle her tale and find out more about her. So let's start out with with what we do know about her. Well, from what I gathered in my research, she goes by two names, Euphemia Murray of Auchtertyre and Euphemia Murray of Lindrose. But they're talking about the same person. She was born in 1769 and was the daughter of Mungo Murray of Lindrose. Now, I believe her cousin was Sir William Murray of Auchtertyre in Perthshire, and it was while she was visiting him at Auchtertyre that she encountered the big cheese I nearly said Robert the Bruce. Okay, the other big cheese, Robert Burns. And what was he doing there? I'm glad you asked. He was on his tour of the Highlands in 1787 and was staying with the Murrays at Auchtertyre House, and he must have felt so inspired during his time there because he wrote two poems which he later included in his book Comrie in the Distance Fair. One of those poems being about, you guessed it, the 18-year-old daughter of the host family he was staying with. He was 28, by the way, if you were curious. I was certainly curious. He called the work Blythe Blythe and Merry Was She and set it to the music of Andrew and his cutty gun. Let me read you a section. Her looks were like a flower in May, her smile was like a simmer morn, she tripped by the banks of Erne as lights a bird upon a thorn. Her bonny face it was as meek as only lamb upon a lea, the evening sun was nae sair sweet, as was the blink o' Femmy's ee. I did find a bit of text that mentioned that Euphemia allegedly didn't appreciate having her looks likened to a flower in May. Gosh, she might not have liked the manosphere time we're living in now, with what guys are calling us today. Anyway, I bring this up because on one hand, I'm sure it's an honour to have been the inspiration to a Robert Burns song, but the issue is that this kind of clouds her whole life story, and we don't know much about her other than Burns wrote a song about her, which is frustrating because she is credited as being a noted fiddle tune composer and wrote the likes of the Miss Murray of Auchtertyre's Strathspeys, published around 1799 in the Go's Complete Repository. But finding more of her works has proved difficult. But of course, she would have probably written loads, right? Because no one composes just one piece of music and packs it in. On a positive note though, her one piece of published music seems to have done quite well. I found this excerpt from a London paper that published at the fete given by Her Royal Highness the Duchess of York at Oatlands on the 30th of May 1799. The dances were as follows, and proceeds to list Miss Murray of Auchtertyre. So her music was enjoyed by the royals. I'll take that as a win. And Euphemia went on to marry David Smythe, a Scottish judge who later became Lord Methven, and they had 2 sons and 2 daughters. And she later died in 1845. Overall, her life story is pretty murky, and a lot of information we have about her is kind of sparse. And it's difficult to navigate through, but she's a great example of historically women only ever being viewed as the muse rather than the artist. History informs you of this great beauty that inspired one of the great Scottish writers, but we've failed these women. These wonderful women that were creatives themselves and probably wrote plenty of their own beautiful compositions that we'll never hear because, well, some men didn't bother to take them seriously. And for clarity as well, I'm not diminishing the creativity of Robert Burns. I think my mother would kill me if I did. I'm simply saying, wouldn't it be nice if some of Burns's female contemporaries could be celebrated in the same way that he is? So if you're thinking, wow, Jennifer, that was a really sparse history of that woman's life, well, wait until you hear about Catherine White, who at multiple times during my research has been referred to by several outlets as a ghost. So fully strap on those beige jumpsuits because we're going ghost hunting. Let's start with what we do have, and that is this collection of works. For my audio-only listeners, we have a copy of a title page that reads, "A collection of original Strathspey reels with variations, waltzes, marches, Irish airs and co, and a new sonata for the pianoforte, violin or German flute by the ladies of a resident in a remote part of the Highlands of Scotland." So obviously a really informative and descriptive title that simultaneously also tells us nothing about who wrote it. And according to Historical Music Scotland, it's believed to be from 1796. And for the possible composers, they say, these anonymous ladies in the remote Highlands would appear to have connections both with Edinburgh's ball-attending society and with military families, possibly be the Mrs. White or a Miss White and a Miss Brocky, possibly of Morayshire or the Mrs. White. And it says they know this because the copy owned by Frank Kidson, featuring a pencil note inscribed with Mrs. White, in the copy now held at the Mitchell Library in Glasgow. And similarly, Historic Music Scotland hold a copy called A Collection of Original Strathspey Reels with Variations, Waltzes, Marches, Irish Airs by a young lady in 1804. And they believe this young lady to be Catherine E. White, as that is who registered this collection's copyright at Stationers' Hall on the 17th of August 1804. And now's the part where you're thinking I'll tell you all about this wonderful composer's life. Well, she was maybe someone who belonged to the upper class, or at least was around them socially. Maybe. The article that I mentioned earlier by McGregor does some great digging into the dedications of some of the pieces and finds that there's some overlap between the two published collections and the families they're dedicated to, such as the Roses of Caravok and the Duke of Gordon, which apparently were known patrons of some notable musicians at that time. So would it be bold to assume they also supported Catherine's compositions? Well, we might never know. We might also never know who she was, what her education in life was like, or what inspired her work. But I'm trying to look at the positives, and these two collections have survived and give us a great insight to her as a composer, and a very talented one at that. So she may still be a bit of a ghost, but at least now she has a name and some music to haunt over. The next woman I'm going to talk about finally has her own Wikipedia page, which is something I didn't think I would get excited over, but here I am. And even though it's like a paragraph long, hurrah, she has a page nonetheless. So let's talk about Magdalene Stirling, who has quickly become my new obsession. She was born in 1765 and was the youngest of 5 daughters, and was born in a place called Ardagh in Perthshire, where she spent most of her life. She had a very good relationship with trad family royalty, the Goes, which were made up of Neil and Nathaniel, who were a father and son duo very famous for their fiddle music, and they even helped publish some of Magdalene's music. As the case with music written by women during this period, it didn't always state her name. It would sometimes refer to her by Miss Stirling of Ardagh. Now, the Goes were a really prestigious publisher at the time, so this was a big deal for her music, and honestly, probably what's kept her music alive and available today. The Goes published many of her tunes and in different collections. She is probably most notably known for her 12 tunes composed by Miss Stirling of Ardagh, which is a beautiful collection of some really fun pieces to play. One of her more popular tunes is Perthshire Hunt, and was written around 1788 and often appears in a wide variety of different collections and is still popular to this day. What's so great to see about this composer is that she has a paper trail and a history that's right in the heart of the golden age of fiddle music. But the story worth telling is that she managed to get her music published under her own name in a time when that seemed virtually impossible for women to do. She was truly amongst the greats, shaping the way we play and hear traditional music today. And the final woman I want to spotlight today is someone with an even bigger Wikipedia page than Magdalene. And again, who knew I would be so happy looking at a website page that just has the details about someone's life, but it makes me so happy. Anyway, I'm talking about Anna Gordon. Also, I might be totally biased because she's from Aberdeen and I'm from Aberdeen, and I really wanted to include a woman from Aberdeen, so here it is. Have I said Aberdeen enough times? So who was Anna Gordon? Well, I'm glad you asked. She is basically known as the Ballad Collector. I don't know if she's officially known by that title, but I would like to refer to her as the Ballad Collector. She was born in Old Aberdeen on the 24th of August 1747 as the youngest daughter to Lilias Forbes of Disbar and her husband Thomas Gordon, who just so happened to be a professor at King's College in Aberdeen, which, as you can imagine, having a dad as a lecturer, it ultimately led to her becoming a very well-educated woman in society. Her father was very well connected to this new intellectual community, or the Enlightenment period, as we discussed at the beginning of this episode, and was a friend of someone called William Tytler, who was an Edinburgh-based writer and lawyer who had an interest in Scottish traditional music. And while she was growing up, she was exposed to a lot of this kind of music. And at this time, ballads were sort of passed down through the oral tradition, so essentially just singing and remembering them. And in a letter by Anna's father, he claims that his daughter was first exposed to ballads through aunts, nurses, and old women from Upper Deeside, whose names are unfortunately simply not mentioned on the ballads that Anna would inevitably jot down. So Anna essentially grew up surrounded by these two worlds, this very academic life paired with the songs and whimsy of traditional music. So why is she important? Well, her ballads are the first ever collected and compiled by a named living person. 35 of her ballads are now an integral part of Scottish ballad canon, and these were all written down between 1782 and 1801. Some were even published by Sir Walter Scott and Robert Jameson in Popular Ballads and Songs, released in 1806. And according to Ruth Perry's 2025 biography, Anna's ballads often feature a female, even feminist perspective. 2/3 of the ballads are actually women's stories, and in them, women have power and agency as their intelligence and resourcefulness enable them to outwit powerful men, and sometimes the ballads highlight intergenerational struggles between younger and older women. There has been some scholarly dispute on origin and interpretation of certain ballads, but her work was commended by world folklorist Francis James Child of Harvard University. So, that kind of feels like a big deal, as he was also the editor of the English and Scottish popular ballads, and in his own words he writes, and I quote, "There are no ballads superior to those sung by Mrs. Brown of Falkland in the last century." So I think that's some pretty high praise. And luckily you can actually listen to some of these ballads on Alison McMorland's record titled Some Ballads of Anna Gordon, Mrs. Brown of Falkland, where you can hear 12 of those ballads. And this album was actually a commission in order to accompany the book, The Ballad World of Anna Gordon, Mrs. Brown of Falkland, which was a recently-ish released biography about Anna Gordon. So do indeed check those out. I'll leave links to them in the description. So as we wrap up this episode, I hope this has inspired you to do your own digging into the lives of these magnificent Scottish women: Euphemia Murray of Auchtertyre, Catherine White, Magdalene Stirling, and Anna Gordon. Perhaps listen to their music, tell your trad listening friends and acquaintances, even post about it on social media. History may have forgotten these women, but we certainly don't have to. I might still be a teeny bit homesick, but I've never been more proud to be Scottish, reading about the incredible women in music that have paved the way for the likes of me growing up as a wee lass in Aberdeenshire, taking my violin lessons for granted. And I wish at that age I had known about these incredible Scottish women in music, and maybe I would have felt more connected to the music of my ancestors and enjoyed playing trad music a bit more. Anyway, that is a problem I will save for my therapist. So on that note, thank you so much for listening to Chords and Queens. I will include any articles of interest, sources, and scores in the description. And if you would like to support the podcast, you can do so by subscribing. And if you want more women in classical music content, you can find me over on TikTok and Instagram at Chords and Queens. Thanks again for listening, and I'll see you again soon.